And on tonight's roundtable, Maura Carlin sits with Nancy Silberkleit of Archie Comics to talk about comics in the classroom.
Welcome to the Roundtable. I'm Maura Carlin. Tonight I'm joined by Nancy Silberkleit, the co-CEO of Archie Comics and a founder of comic book fairs where, and I quote, comic books plus children equal reading, knowledge, and confidence. And you, of course, can join our conversation, call, email, tweet, whatever's on your screen, and join in. So Nancy, let me start with, in the past, many parents and educators don't think of comic books as legitimate reading. Why do you believe that it is?
Well, I first want to say zam, wham, wow to your audience on this Valentine's Day in Mamaroneck on the local live, so thank you. But I have heard that, and I've heard that from very higher ups in educations at times, but not that often. The reason this is high functioning, it's a literary experience that's high functioning. And the reason for that is that rich graphics, pictures in these panels trigger the brain for analysis. That's heavy thinking. So once someone is starting to take in values, opinions of expanding that story, because when you look at a comic book, in a speech bubble, like, I see on your logo here, you just have a few words, but the rich graphics expand it, and who has to expand it but the reader? So as you're expanding the story, you're putting in your own values, and you're internalizing those values.
How do you know that? That's interesting. I've never heard that.
Because I used to be a teacher. I was an art teacher. And I was lucky that I got to see the whole student body. But at that time, I was that was not my business, comic books, but I still was very much attuned to pictures. And when you go to a museum, there's so much you can take in from just that painting. What was happening in the time of that artist's life? What was their life was like.
So do you think by putting it in the pictures, the story through the pictures, people are projecting themselves into the picture more?
Absolutely. And it may not be where they see themselves, but the panels are connecting the person to that story. And as they turn the pages and dive into those panels, those pictures are asking the reader to expand the story. So to expand the story, you have to have a lot of thinking going on. So it's a quite complex reading experience. And for those people who have, minimized that reading experience, I say, go back and look at this platform. But now our Common Core standards that are guiding education throughout the United States, that is one of their requirements, that the English department does introduce this literary platform. And it's not hard to do because the kids eat it up like a bowl full of candy.
Well, comic strips and comic books have been around for a long time. But everyone talks about nowadays graphic novels. What's the difference, if any?
Well, my quick answer to that is it just sounds a little bit smarter. I was at a school speaking, and I said to the children, when you go home, don't say your principal, when you're discussing what happened to, at school around the coffee table, don't say your principal had a lady in talking about comic books. Say she was talking about graphic literacy. You'll sound much smarter. But, actually, when you talk about graphic novels, the stories are much more extensive. There's a lot more reading.
In a graphic novel versus a comic book?
Yes.
What are comic book fairs? And tell us how that came about, because I know that's something you love.
Well, I may show this to your audience. This was an idea that I had mentioned to my husband before his passing, and it was really going directly to your audience, going to the schools, bringing the comic books to them. And when I went into Archie Comics, there was a problem. I had never read comic books because when I was first introduced to reading, I had trouble with that and I was left back.
And you were told that we had to read literature.
Yes. So when I was left back, a lot of shame came with that. And I looked at reading as a punishment. So once I came in,
know this.
yeah, that's a whole long story.
Okay.
But once I came into Archie, I had to start picking up these comic books, and I couldn't stop turning the pages. I fell in love with them, but eventually, I found a time where I really liked that reading experience and, sitting down and diving into the pages. So I started going to Barnes & Noble and other bookstores and buying books, not comic books. So I fell in love with reading. So I wanted to give that experience. So first I was thinking about, on my husband's watch, connecting the young people to comic books, because that's where your market is. But now I was thinking a lot deeper about that comic books plus children that you talked about, my quote, equals reading. And not only reading, because once you're reading, you have knowledge. And once you have knowledge, you have confidence. And once you have confidence, you have creativity. So once I started feeling good about my intellect, sky's the limit. I started creating teacher study guides. This was a wonderful story that we did on getting drastic with plastic, about one thinking about not using plastic as much as they had.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to discuss the plastic initiative and other social initiatives. So come on, stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Do you need space for a meeting, conference, or presentation? LMC TV has what you need. Our 768 square foot studio space is ideal for many types of productions, readings, recitals, rehearsals, and workshops. The space has video recording capability, as well as daylight temperature lighting, green screen, and stage. 2 additional rooms at 208 and 156 square feet can be used for any of your needs. Auditions, meetings, classes, workshops, one-on-one instructions, and more. Both rooms feature video monitors with Chromecasting capability, making presentations a breeze. To reserve one or more of our spaces, contact Dina Schumacher at 914-381-2002, extension 206, or email dschumacher@lmctv.org.
Welcome back. Let's talk about social initiatives through comics, which I understand is something you advocate. And you mentioned at our last segment something to do with plastics. Why don't you tell us about that initiative?
Well, when I first came into Archie and I saw how, the power of graphics can get messaging across very easily. As a teacher, I know the children don't want to be lectured to. So, why not put these PSAs, public service announcements, in a comic book, wrap it in a speech bubble? So, education is always talked about, but environmental issues is right there. So I thought, what about doing a story on plastic bags? So I had heard that the country of Rwanda had banned plastic bags. So I went over to Rwanda to see for myself, and it was quite impactful seeing people in the streets walking with their goods wrapped in cloth or something else, but not plastic. So we created Getting Drastic with Plastic. It comes in, I didn't bring that digest, but it comes in a little book like this.
Okay.
It's among many, many stories. So I think it's Betty and Veronica's spring annual. So it's this story, and then I wanted teachers to feel comfortable bringing in comic books into their classroom to teach whatever. In this case, it's a science lesson. So I had someone create a teacher's study guide that helps the teacher have a little bit more confidence on where to go with these panels.
Discussion topics and how to formulate it. We've also tackled gun violence in the comics. How did that come about?
Well,
I mean, today
yes.
is the year anniversary of the Parkland shooting, and we should all acknowledge that. But Your gun violence initiative actually came out years before.
Absolutely, and I was advised not to do it. This is a non-Archie story because, coming in as a co-CEO and then having, the background of a teacher, I was like a machine with these ideas, but usually they were on the platform of public service announcements, trying to educate, when I was teaching science, history, art. So I tried to get in as much as I could, and that seemed to follow me as a publisher. So I couldn't keep doing that under the Archie rainbow. So I do have a foundation, but I came about with the gun violence because of this issue of that we keep seeing, man going out into the street with extraordinary violence. And who would ever think, a parent, a teacher would have to bring up this topic. So I did it in a very subtle way. I don't have that with me today. And I'd like to point out, I have a new character I brought with me, Scarlett.
Oh, yes, I forgot.
Next to Veronica.
Right, so this is Veronica Lodge.
Yes.
She was the rich girl, as I recall.
Well, can I say something? I don't like to have negatives. Veronica, she has the CIA in her. She has confidence, intelligence, and allure. So any of your viewers who align themselves with Veronica, remember that. You got the CIA in you.
Okay. And you have Scarlett.
Scarlett Saltee. She is a new character. And when you look at Scarlett here, her intellectual property started out teen in the high school in Riverdale High. She is very skilled in building, and she also desires friends, but she has trouble creating those friendships because Scarlett is autistic. So with my travels, her IP expanded, that Scarlett's look is a little different now because her background is very diverse. Her mother is from the Philippines and her father is from Ireland. So I gave her a last name. She started out only as Scarlett. So now it's Scarlett Saltee, and Saltee reflects the Saltee Islands in Ireland, a beautiful place, and it happens to kind of tie in with my environmental initiative. So the new character, her message is on inclusion, because people who are autistic, they understand everything that's being said. They understand the body language, and they do desire friendship. So it's up to you, and myself to understand how to interact with differences.
Is she included in the regular Archie Comics series, or is it a separate series for Scarlett?
Well, right now, Scarlett is not in our digest. She is digital. And I love that because it's enabling me to really connect with the people and express my desire for them, for you, for your audience, to be an ambassador to propel kindness, and think about it extra carefully when you meet people who are, you think, if I was just going like this, you may say, oh, what's that person doing? But that could be just part of a person who's on the spectrum. Every person, I think Scarlett's one of millions of people on the spectrum, and they all are very different. They're very unique, but they do have some common things where it's hard for them to make friendships, and you just have to understand their wiring. That's it.
Another thing that I know that you've tackled is bullying, which I will tell you, having read Archie Comics as a kid, I found interesting because, as I recall, there were characters who were, in fact, mean to others. Or at least that's how I remember it. And so how do you make that work? I mean, Veronica wasn't very nice to Betty, and Reggie wasn't very nice to Archie a lot of the time.
But that's part of the Archie formula, and I think I have it sitting on a chair over there, a comic cover that, shows, tension, and someone, bullying's about a person usually having an imbalance of power. They think they deserve, more whatever, and that's what creates the problem. But the formula for Archie Comics is putting a bunch of kids in a high school, creating a little bit of conflict, and letting the characters work it out on their own without any adult intervention.
Always a good message.
Right, and leaving you with that chuckle or a very empowering message. So, we did have Reggie, and that's his IP, to be, mean and not very thoughtful. And
What's an IP?
Intellectual IP, intellectual property, property. And I was once speaking to a huge group, and there was this little boy. He kept raising and raising his hand. I finally had to call on him because I kept talking about IP. And he says, "Can I tell you where the bathroom is?" I thought that was priceless.
That is.
So, intellectual property, and I love talking about intellectual property, even to the littlest ones, our kindergartners. I have, a lovely, way of introducing that, and I love them speaking about it because they'll go intellectual, they try, they get the words out, but they have the concept. So, again, Veronica can be very unfair and unkind, but it's that business style. It's that CIA in her. She tries to work it. But there was a story where I saw Betty and Veronica tugging on a scarf, and they both wanted it. And what does Veronica do? She says, "Betty, Archie just walked into the room." Betty loses concentration, and who gets the scarf? And that story, I read that about 12 years ago. It has stuck in my heart because I don't ever want to be that way. And that's what comic books, that's what the Archie comic brand does. It sticks with people for their lifetime and teaches powerful messages.
So that brings me to my last question, which is, as I said, many of us, myself included, grew up with the Archie comics. But how does it feel to have new generations engaging with the stories, whether it's through these comic books or with the TV show Riverdale? I mean, it's really living on right now.
Thank you so much for mentioning Riverdale. It's on the CW channel, it's on Netflix, and we also have a new show, The Chilling Tales of Sabrina. And people, when they first heard about that, they were like grabbing their pearls and fainting. But I look at this show as very impactful because it is doing cross generations. The person, I met a lady who's 70. She goes, "I knew my kids were watching this show, Riverdale. I heard about it, and it just didn't seem like, my Riverdale. But I wanted to be cool, and I sat down there with them." She goes, "I can't stop watching that show." And then the kids go, "Grandma, how do you know our show?" And so she's talking about these comic books, and the children are picking up and reading the classic Archie, and then our classic fans, they're sitting down there watching Riverdale. So you're having conversation between two different generations. It's fantastic.
That's great. Nancy, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And you out there, thank you for joining us, and stay tuned. We've got more of The Local Live coming right up.